Now, what's a derivative? Good question. Derivatives have been described, I believe accurately, as essentially a way to lie and cover up about a loss which you have suffered financially. So that rather than saying, oh my gosh, I'm bankrupt, I can't pay that debt, what you say instead is, no, I'll make another bet to cover that loss in the hopes that eventually I won't have to pay that increased loss coming from the derivatives bet. So another way of describing derivatives is the guy, the perennial gambler who's losing at the roulette table, and rather than pay up and call it a day, he says, no, let's play double or nothing. And he loses again. And rather than having to pay, he says, no, double or nothing. Derivatives are a double or nothing approach to the massive losses which are being suffered throughout the economy. And that is the nature of the financial aggregates which have grown and which constitute the explosive charge of this hyperinflationary situation run amok, which Mr. LaRouche has been talking about. Now, let me just say, the usual definitions of inflation are complete poppycock. It's nonsense. Especially if you've studied economics, it's double poppycock, because what they tell you there is, well, there's different kinds of inflation. Inflation, they say, is more money chasing fewer goods, which is ridiculous. That's not where it comes from. Or they say, well, there's cost push inflation. And what they mean by cost push inflation is that they blame the rise in prices on wages being paid to workers, and that cost is supposedly pushing the inflation. So that's just a transparent excuse for trying to cut wages further. Then there is demand pull inflation, which if you can understand that, you'll get at least 1 or 2 degrees in economics and understand absolutely nothing. Demand pull, as far as I'm concerned, is basically the economists who are pulling your leg to try to make you understand that something is going on here. That's not what is actually going on. Nor should people try to locate the existence of the hyperinflationary problem today in a simple expression of it, such as rising prices on the consumer market. It does show up there too. You do see that. You see on Obama's watch that the price of gasoline at the pump has doubled. Slight problem. You do see it in food prices at the supermarket, also soaring, because this financial bubble gets translated into the consumer economy through the speculation on derivatives in the future market and commodities and so on and so forth. But what is actually going on with the hyperinflation, think of it rather as a huge pressure cooker. And what's going on is that the buildup of hyperinflation is occurring within the financial aggregates themselves. And you can see that, for example, in this growth here. But it's a pressure cooker which is building up. At a certain point, this thing is going to blow to smithereens, at which point then you will see the transfer of this thing out into all different areas of the economy. Right now, what you have is the buildup of rapidly escalating, hyperbolically escalating financial aggregates circulating on the basis of absolutely nothing, increasing on the basis of the double or nothing principle of covering up losses. But the real problem of hyperinflation occurs when you actually go and look at this from the standpoint which Mr. LaRouche developed as a pedagogical way of understanding the process in the economy, his famous typical collapse function or triple curve, which we have here on the screen now. Now, really the only surprise in what Gross said is that people were surprised about it, because Lyndon LaRouche developed this representation back in 1995-96. So this is almost 2 decades old, LaRouche talking about the buildup of this explosive charge within the global financial system that at some point was going to blow sky high. And this was a heuristic model which he developed for presentation at a conference which he addressed in the Vatican back in that period, in the mid-1990s. Now, on the triple curve function, I mean, the thing that's most relevant here, and I think the part where people have the most difficulty in understanding what LaRouche is getting at, is you're looking at a single unified process, not 3 separate distinct curves, a single unified process where you have the growth of the financial aggregates, the growth of monetary aggregates, which at a certain point, the rate of growth exceeds the growth of the financial aggregates if you've got a cancerous bubble developing as we have today. And mind you, let me just clarify, what we're showing here is not an increase in absolute amounts. This is the rate of change. The rate of growth of the monetary aggregates exceeds the rate of growth of the financial aggregates because it's simply required to somehow or other keep this double or nothing bubble growing. But the crucial factor, and this is where LaRouche's economics is absolutely singular, is understanding the relationship of this to the third lower curve of physical economic input-output. The problem of hyperinflation is not too much money chasing too few goods. This has nothing to do with GDP or gross domestic product, because GDP does not reflect the actual physical economy. GDP is a monetary calculation based on basically what the market will bear. In other words, whatever sells. And therefore you have, for example, the International Monetary Fund stating explicitly in published documents that their argument is that drug production in countries such as Colombia must be included in the calculation of gross domestic product because it sells. If it sells, somebody wants it. That's called effective demand, and therefore it's got to be counted in GDP. So GDP is a completely phony measure. It's phony not only because its content includes actually unproductive and destructive things, such as, for example, drug production, or, for example, payments made to the economics profession for teaching at universities. That's almost as destructive as, maybe more so, than the drugs, because it justifies the drugs in point of fact. But it's also false in its axiomatics. The premise of the whole thing is that there is a one-to-one monetary calculation that can be made, a monetary unit of account that can be used to describe an economy, a physical economy, where what actually is involved in a physical economy, what is really the metric that's needed against which you have a hyperinflationary blowout going, is the expansion of the productive powers of labor. The crucial question in the success or failure of a physical economy is the degree to which your policies increase the productive powers of labor. That is to say, the efficiency of man's general activity based on creative advances, science, and technology to be able to mobilize an increasingly dense energy flux. In other words, growing energy flux density through the means of production to transform man's relationship to the universe which he is a part of. And that is the actual only metric that applies to a physical economy. It's a changing metric. This is not a ruler where you can say 1 unit is 1 unit is 1 unit. It changes, and it has to change because you're talking about a dynamic process where the premise of creativity itself changes the entire parameters of the physical economy. And that's what is in fact reflected in LaRouche's triple curve here. And as Shakespeare said, in a similar context actually, the time is out of joint. You have a situation where there is a complete disjointedness between this cancerous growth of the financial aggregates, which we've seen as reflected in the derivatives, and the collapse of the actual physical economic process as reflected in energy flux density and the capability of the human species to reproduce itself at a higher level in the next period, to increase its potential relative population density.